Let's start. I'm Vincent, and I have known Rayman surprisingly for 20 years now,
Over half our lives.
more than half our lives, and we are committed to doing a manga reading club of a Japanese manga called Hyouge, which Rayman introduced to me about 10 years ago, but which recently received a complete unofficial English translation. Finally, it was our chance to read it together, and Rayman has kindly agreed to participate in a 2-volume per month reading and discussion regime, of which tonight is the first night.
Very excited. This is probably 10 years in the making. We had to make do with the anime version about a decade ago.
Yes, and that, I don't know if you know how you found it, but it was definitely Rayman who said to me, "Hey, check out this anime," which I then promptly watched. And in many small ways, it's been a part of my life over the last 10 years. I remember when I first went to Japan with my then girlfriend, it was already in my mind, because when we went to the local museum, we were lucky to see an exhibition on the main character, Furuta Sasuke, and his tea wares.
Very romantic.
And I remember messaging Rayman from the museum. And that would have been like 10 years ago. And now I'm married to that woman, and we're in a tea house that she and I built in the backyard of our house as we take this video.
I don't remember why I recommended it. Like, all I knew was that when I heard about it, it was like, oh wow, such an atypical theme for like an animated show. Like a historical piece, not focused on, well, I guess there's some action bits in it, but like the core essence was about the tea ceremony and how it impacted, political life in Japan. But told in a very entertaining way. So I think the series is 50 episodes long?
Yeah.
An NHK production.
I thought that we could do, every episode we talk about 3 things that we liked or that we thought about. And we haven't discussed this prior. So my first thing today is the historical context and what I understand from it, based on not just rereading the first 2 volumes in the last couple of weeks, but from watching the TV show Shogun, which Darren, who's just in there with Yui and the kids, was a super fan of. And yeah, just summarize what I understand about this world based on all the other Japanese media I've been consuming recently. So, the important thing about Japanese history is, up until their loss of World War II, there was always an emperor that was the ultimate power in Japan. And for different parts of Japan's history, the emperor either ruled directly in his own name, or through civilian nobles, like famous and powerful lords and ladies, or alternatively, his rule of Japan was exercised through samurai, who are military leaders who control territory in Japan. And this manga is set in a time in the 1500s or the 1600s, in the Warring States period of Japan, when just before a historical figure emerged who united the country for the first time and ruled as a samurai shogunate for 300 years until the modern era in the middle of the 19th century.
Pretty much sets the stage for modern Japan, doesn't it?
So in this era that we know of, the emperor lives in Kyoto, and there's not just one samurai family in Japan that runs the whole country. There's lots of them. There's 20, 30, 50 different families, and there is one very powerful leader named Oda Nobunaga. Oda is his surname and his family name. And he seems to be on the rise and has lots of different samurai families aligned to him. And he is conquering and uniting the country under his own power, which is, of course, a challenge to the emperor. But he seeks to be the one that the emperor chooses to run the country for him. And in this world, Oda Nobunaga is the boss. There are two other major characters, Hashiba Hideyoshi, who is one of Oda Nobunaga's generals, and Akechi Matsuhide, who seems like a principled samurai, but he's not an Oda. And the major theme of the first two volumes is that these like second and third most powerful people in Japan who is not an Oda are feeling ill-used by Oda Nobunaga.
The opening volumes of chapters of the manga, I think even visually, they set like a huge gorge between like the influence between like Nobunaga and his like subordinates. Like for one, like Nobunaga, he dresses completely differently. The way he conducts himself, like he doesn't stick by like, I guess, like honorifics. He knows he's like the top dog, and he projects it.
The thing that I find most fascinating about Nobunaga is his openness to Western costumes and art.
Barbarian culture.
Yeah. So the opening chapter of this manga that we're reading, Hyogemono, is our main character, Furuta Sasuke, who's a lowly samurai, sitting in a council of warlords, critiquing their armor and how yuck their armor is.
He's out of place. He's in the company of warriors essentially, and he's I guess you could say the scholarly warrior, like, but more scholarly. Like that he doesn't.
He's not very good at fighting.
He's not good at fighting, but he's passionate about, I guess, not just the arts and the culture of the time, but perhaps like the prestige that comes with like being like learned.
Yeah.
Like I feel.
He's a gentleman samurai, like adopting a Western, thing.
I think so. Spoiler alert. Jumping like through a couple of chapters, there's like initially you don't really get like much of a perspective of like where like Furuta like stands within like the hierarchy, but like you learn like hints. Like for example, like when there's a staging of troops for inspection, Furuta's like I guess like coordinating with the other like samurai and lords. Like one of the lords like has 6,000 men at the ready, whereas like our boy like Furuta only has 50.
Okay.
And he can't like his I guess fiefdom is so small.
400 koku of rice.
It's 400 koku at that time.
Yeah. Maybe you should introduce to the casual viewer like what's a koku and.
To be honest, I don't know. Like I just know it as like a arbitrary measure of
your wealth.
Of your wealth.
Yeah, based on how much rice you can produce in your property or your estate that year.
So basically, how productive it is.
Yeah.
Either way, long story short, it's clear that like our boy like Sasuke, he's orders of magnitude below.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that he gains the favor of Nobunaga, like essentially the man with the ambition to become a god.
Yeah.
Because of his quirks. And I think that's how we are introduced to this character. Well, and by the way, like Sasuke Furuta is a real person.
Yeah.
Whether or not he was actually like this in like his
I've seen his pottery. Not that he made with his own hands, but that he ordered from artisans of the time.
So, like, I think it's an interesting characterization. Again, at first we introduced to him like, okay, he's your samurai lord, he's a noble, but I guess as the story unfolds, like you get to see that, oh hey, he's actually not that high ranking, but I don't know, perhaps like there was a deliberate choice to like center the story on like this character. It's like Nobunaga's not like an obscure Japanese like historical figure. He's like the
right? He's like the George Washington
exactly.
of Japan. Yeah.
So I think what's also refreshing about Hyogemon was that it's a famous, well-known story, but told from a completely different perspective.
Yeah.
And I think once it's established that like you're looking through the rise of this like great person, through perhaps a more novel like perspective, like I don't know, it sets the stage for like interesting like observations and insights.
Okay. All right. Do you have a point that you want to introduce, like that you want to talk about?
So, although we're just two manga volumes in, like this is our second time being exposed to the whole story.
I haven't read the whole thing before, but I've read maybe up to volume 10 before.
Yeah.
And I've watched all the anime.
Yeah. So yeah, my first exposure was obviously the anime. Like, I think it doesn't cover the full.
No, it covers like the first 6 or 8 volumes or something.
Yeah, perhaps up to I think the Tokugawa like arc. But anyway, like I think jumping back into the story, like it reminded me of how refreshing it was. But I guess like revisiting this like perhaps like a decade later, I guess you see two things. Like the thing that stood out to me was not I think the novelty of following, such an interesting character like Sasuke, but it was more about his motivations. At the very least, in the early chapters, he's painted as like a very superficial person.
Yeah, silly, almost.
Silly, like in that he's drawn to the things that he loves, and that's like really, it's a fun like thing to attach to as a character, but you also see how superficial his motivations are. Like for example, like his desire to rise up in station isn't necessarily, for example, to become a better governor.
No.
Or to become a better warrior.
Famous or
he just wants
change the world.
He just wants to become like a well-respected, influential socialite, essentially.
Yeah.
Like there's this great quote in one of the probably volume 2 where he laments like completing perhaps like some pretty well esteemed like military accomplishments, like for example like getting like a castle, securing a castle without bloodshed, like
a surrender of an enemy of his lord.
Yeah, like without like any like just with his simple cunning, right?
Yeah,
no bloodshed, nothing, and that's
and
like very heroic of him.
Just for the viewer, he secured that because he has a high level of artistic knowledge, like knowledge about what art, which in this era was about like pottery, things like this, was valuable. And in those times, these little artworks had tremendous value. And a lot of the samurai leaders were expected to know about the value of art. But obviously weren't well educated and were just like soldiers with swords and armor. And he faked a teacup, which like his mate, the potter in his home district, made for him. And then he brought that in like a fancy box into an enemy's castle, and he said, "Surrender your castle and I shall give you this teacup, and when you sell it, you can set up your family for generations," right? But that cup was worthless. So his deception was, and he got that lord to surrender his castle for that cup.
Yeah. But the implications of like these like tea-wares, right? So the first time when I watched the first few episodes, like all those years back, like it never really clicked to me, like, okay, why were these like bits of like pottery or tea-wares, like they call them treasures, meibutsu, right? why were they so influential? Like, why did they cost so much? Like, for example, like a container for tea, a tea caddy would be worth as much as an entire prefecture.
Yeah.
Like, I think this time around, like, we introduced like a battle where like there was a conflict. Like Sasuke had to like seize a castle, and I think one of these treasures came up. Sasuke, like, being like as fixated on like the aesthetic aspects of like the actual objects. He's obviously he just wants to secure the treasure, but I think we introduced like one of the lords who like refuses to give it up because it represents his soul. And I think once you establish that, like, and then you view the rest of the conflicts, basically each castle like challenge like Nobunaga's to take over. It's almost as if like him collecting all these pieces is simply like a very convenient way of him
collecting the whole of the nation, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's this great scene like in I think chapter 2 of volume 2 where the biggest flex is him showcasing to I think super influential like merchants that he has like a sizable collection of these like like liberated like treasures from like fallen like foes.
Yeah, so it's kind of like
that's the currency.
It's like cornering, like owning 60% of the entire New York Stock Exchange. Like in that era, the artworks were the portable assets that represented wealth and power.
You could argue that it's the contract, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know. I thought that was really cool when I think I made that connection again. I knew it was there, but it was never. Because the thing with, I think the translation of the anime we watched, it wasn't super good. So I think a lot of that subtext was lost. But this time around with like the new translation, I don't know. Like I got more out of like the historic, the power grab or the quiver.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting point that the art pieces are...
They don't mean too much, and I think Nobunaga, like, his character...
I don't think he cares about the artwork. He cares about their value.
Yeah. He cares about what they project.
Yeah.
And the thing is, we introduced him visually in the manga as, like, someone who's super ostentatious. He wears, like, Portuguese armor.
Frills,
basically showing... It's essentially a sign
he's special. He's the top dog in Japan.
Exactly. Like he doesn't fit into any norm. And he's capable of like existing outside of like, the established traditions.
Yeah. One aspect of the manga that exemplifies this theme is that when Sasuke does a great service for his lord and he goes to a castle that Nobunaga is in, which is very ostentatious. And then Nobunaga says, you can have this beautiful art box, which is like an inlaid box.
Oh, such a great scene.
It's very beautiful. Or you can have $10 million, like the equivalent of in coins.
A bag of money.
Or a bag of money, right? And then Sasuke's thinking in his head, because in this world, the box is obviously more than $10 million. Like the artwork... in Oda Nobunaga's time represents more money and power than the money. And Sasuke's thinking in his head, oh look, obviously I want the box because I love the art and it's worth more.
And it is worth more.
It is worth more in that time. But, this is my lord and I should be humble and I should take the money. So he says... I'll take the money, but he reaches for the box and he grabs the box.
Yep. There's a great I think counter lesson that Nobunaga he gives to like Furuta, and again like Furuta is like a really lowly lord, probably like lieutenant. Right. So if you think about it,
not that low, but like
it's not that low.
Yeah.
But the point is, it's like he's really not worth the time. To this great military leader, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, like he tells like Sasuke, like the value of money.
Yeah.
And
That's right. That's what I was saying. Yeah.
the influence that, like, even though like Sasuke like outwardly expresses that he wants the money, even though he doesn't.
Yeah.
Like Nobunaga sees through this,
Yeah.
of course.
And he says you can have both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I think that's also a flex of his like influence and power.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I think it was a really powerful lesson, not just with Sasuke, but potentially with his reader, and how if you have capital, you can make people
do
whatever you want, and you can achieve your goals that way.
Yeah, because Nobunaga says this is how you motivate people. You give them gifts, and he's always giving gifts to his samurai.
Yeah.
Like if they do something good, it's like, here you go. You can have that prefecture. You can have this artwork. You can have that land.
The paradox to that is that so part of Nobunaga's quest and objective is to collect as many of these treasures. Because again, if you have the whole set,
You unite the country.
It's proof that you've united the country and you are the rightful, I guess, like leader, right? Politically.
Yeah.
So him just giving away like some of these pieces like shows you like how I think confident he is.
Yeah.
Like even without like these like cultural artifacts.
But the art pieces also bind his vassals to him. Like one of the, and I guess this is moving on to my second point, that like a lot of subtext is expressed through the use and display of teaware. Like Akechi Matsuhide is like a high-ranking lord in Oda Nobunaga's power base.
Basically number 2, right?
Yeah, number 2 and number 3. And he's gifted really amazing tea pieces, including this great kettle. And in one story, Furuta Sasuke goes to Akechi Mitsuhide's castle for a dinner, and all he can think about is, I can finally see this tea kettle, right? That our Lord Oda Nobunaga gave to Akechi, right, as a reward for his service. And they have this great meal, and then Akechi Mitsuhide like says all this stuff about how loyal he is, and then he says, I shall serve tea.
There's also this tension in the air between who's loyal and who's not, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's like undercutting the entire banquet.
That's right. And Furuta is so disappointed when Lord Akechi brings out some crappy tea kettle.
Like a normal one.
A normal one that's not the one given to him by his lord. And he reports this information to one of the most important non-samurai character, Soeki, Senno Soeki, the tea merchant from Osaka, who plays this background role in fomenting
the guy who
rebellion.
really likes black.
Yeah.
He'll come up a lot.
Yeah. So I guess like the showing of art, like as opposed to its financial or artistic value, the way it's used to bind people to each other, that was also an interesting subject for me.
Oh yeah. Like, and again, it was something I didn't catch when I was younger.
That's right.
So I think traditionally in Japanese tea houses, there's a space where you can display like an important art piece. Usually it's just for aesthetic purposes, but
we have an art piece too, I don't know if you can see. Anyway,
for example, and there's meaning behind it. Like, like for example, like some people might have a portrait of like Queen Elizabeth, right?
Yeah.
And then that might show you that might tell you something about the person.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing here in these tea rooms. Each lord, I guess person of influence would display something, and it changes depending which guest is invited.
That's right.
So
and your relationship with them.
So the use of like a boring plain old like tea kettle.
Yeah.
Like
it was offensive to Oda Nobunaga and was a precursor to his Akechi Mitsuhide's eventual revolt against his lord.
So I think this is like the really interesting part. It's basically fomenting rebellion, but not told through perhaps like movements of armies or perhaps like a very fiery scene. It's like intentioned through. Essentially those artworks. What you choose.
He showed his real spirit when he didn't choose the kettle.
And I think that was like a really cool.
I
don't know if they actually did that in the real in history, but I don't know. I think it's a really interesting visual device.
Yeah.
It's like a visual representation of that person's true intention.
Okay.
And there's a lot of build up thematically to the tea ceremony as a reflection of one's true heart.
Yeah.
So there's a great sequence where Soeki, that tea master, he invites Sasuke into his tea house for the first time, and Sasuke is being the art nerd he is. He just sizes up the whole environment, what materials you use to make the house or whatever.
What's the design?
What's the design? How does so he's breaking it down analytically, and there's this great scene where he's analyzing the entryway to the tea house,
which we have right here.
And it's a really small door, right? So small enough to the point where a samurai or a person wearing a sword in their body can't actually or gracefully enter the tea house with the weapon. So
which is a symbol of their samurai-ness.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not only a weapon for self-defense or attack.
It's like a Jedi being denuded of their lightsaber.
Pretty much, it's a symbol of their authority, right?
Yeah.
And their pride or whatever, their station. So I think that, and the thing is, that scene isn't a throwaway scene. It's a well-established sequence, maybe several pages long, and it makes it really clear that these meetings in these tea houses, there's an intention of vulnerability that has to be, I won't say on show, but to make the most out of
you have to be vulnerable. Yeah.
You have to be vulnerable.
You have to give up your arms.
You have to be alert to perhaps the other people within the setting, right? You can't waltz in and not be a good listener. So there's
be a good guest.
Be a good guest. And there's also this precondition of mandatory empathy, right? And the thing is, we're not talking about reading careful subtext or minute changes with a person's intention. We're talking about it's a game of poker, super high stakes poker. So if you misinterpret the slightest details, for example, why did this guy use a different teapot or a tea kettle? That could be the difference between you invading him, and then or him and you as an ally.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think loading up the gun with such maybe a hair trigger.
Yeah.
I think it builds up such an interesting tension, which I did not get with my first reading.
Yep. I was going to talk about that scene as well because one of my favorite dialogues in the first two volumes is the conversation Sen no Soki has with Furuta Sasuke. So one thing I want to say about Sen no Soeki is that he's a historical figure who was a renowned aesthete at the time. He had influence over national politics because he was the tea master to Oda Nobunaga. And he was a civilian, a non-samurai, a merchant. But he was really wealthy. He was a trendsetter. He played a role in national politics behind the scenes. And in this meeting at the tea house, one of the lines that struck with me this time is that Furuta Sasuke says, he invited me to his tea house after only meeting once. Who does he think he is? I'm a samurai. He's just a tea merchant, a merchant. But then Furuta Sasuke goes there. He's in awe of Soeki's tea house and tea garden and the hospitality he receives, and he recognizes that Soeki is so far above him in terms of culture, aesthetics, philosophy, power, that at the end of that meeting he bows and he begs to be, or asks to be, Soeki's student in the way of tea. I want to say two more things about Soeki. Number one, he's depicted in the anime and the manga wearing always black robes, with a rakusu, which is I think, anachronistic Zen Buddhist piece of clothing, because in real history, and this might be my third point, in real history, Zen Buddhist monks wear black robes, which I have as a lay Zen practitioner, and then priests or monks wear like a coloured robe on top, which is the same as what the Buddha wore in India like 2,500 years ago. And they wore large size ones at that time. But when there was the Meiji Revolution in the middle of the 19th century, and Buddhism was, which had become quite corrupt in Japan at that time, was cut down, then Buddhist monks like shrunk the big massive robe into like these tiny square pieces, which they wore under their civilian clothes as like a secret part of their Buddhist identity. And I think from a historical perspective, it was that little thing that Soeki wears in the manga was first invented in the 19th century, so it's anachronistic in that way. But it just goes to show that he is dressed like a monk in this story.
Yeah. I think, so that kind of dovetails really nicely to like, another thing that stuck to me. So we're in the Warring States period. It's literally called that.
Yeah.
And wars are fought on the battlefield, but you have this like underground conflict that's just as fierce between aesthetics and taste.
Aesthetics, culture, politics. Right. Yeah.
So I think it's like whether or not like Soeki actually wore those anachronistic pieces, I don't think it matters. Like, so thematically, him presenting himself like a monk is diametrically opposing to Nobunaga, who's the ostentatious guy. No, this is the guy who I think has an office that was like embellished in gold.
Yeah.
His whole office was gold.
Yeah. And he was going to invite the emperor there to like shock him into like, this is how wealthy I am.
Yeah. And you have this like opposing force essentially with Soeki, represented by simplicity. Just wearing monk clothes, the aesthetic of black, which is nothing.
Yeah.
And that's the other like battle that's been waging, isn't it?
Yeah.
Being waged.
I think that's really interesting. And my two other points of Soeki is, one, he and Furuta acknowledge the power of greed over themselves, that they are greedy men, that they are men who want, in this case, beautiful artistic objects for themselves, and acknowledge and freely pursue those things in their life. Which is something that I can understand, because I want, a beautiful garden, I want beautiful things, I want amazing tea, and I want to drink imported sake and wine, and I want money to buy a yacht. So I understand that greed, and I think that it's, if you want to resolve that problem, which I think Sasuke resolves at the end of the manga series, because I've just had like a preview from my father-in-law who's also read the manga, you have to kind of acknowledge that the power of greed over you. So I acknowledge that. And the last point I want to make on this topic is that anachronism about Soeki. I recognized that before, but what I recognized today when I read the end of chapter 2, volume 2, is that this manga is probably not historically accurate. It's a reimagining of Japanese history, which is something I didn't know before, because there are lots of things here which according to traditional histories, did not happen. So I guess I won't spoil it, but I'm getting the sense that the story this author is telling is his reimagining of Japanese history, but not the textbook history.
See, that's what makes it an interesting story. Like, I don't think you need to be... Look, you have, like, a message to, like, tell.
Yeah.
Stick to it. Stick to that theme. Like, you can take liberties along the way. You want to learn about the history, read a history book, right? The two can coexist, not zero-sum game. Look, I think about that environment of, like, competing aesthetics. Like, a lot of, like, the early manga, I think it's almost you have two parallel, like, stories, really. You have, like, almost the slapstick experiences of, like,
Sasuke.
Like, our main character, like, Sasuke, who's kind of bumbling around, like, probably like a volcano about to erupt, right? Like, unknowingly. So about, like, clashing aesthetics, there's this other, like, the other point that stood out to me was how one presents themselves, what they wear, like, perhaps, like, what their house looks like, or heck, what kind of horse they, like, ride on. It's about projection of power, essentially. And what's really interesting about the character of, like, Soeki is that, look, before the manga, like, I knew about him from, I guess, like, tea culture. Like, he's often presented as, like,
he's really a renowned tea estate,
like a really humble, like a low key kind of, like, Zen monk kind of guy, right?
Yeah.
But here, like,
he's not.
His ferocity, and his intent behind these aesthetic decisions, like, it's laid out bare. It's an act of war, the declaration of war.
He's not a sympathetic figure in the manga.
He's not. He's just as ambitious as, like, Nobunaga, who's the 1 in 1,000-year warlord.
Yeah.
Right? And he's just the tea master, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, like, that is such an interesting, like, concept to set up. Like, even if it's not historically accurate.
That's interesting. I hadn't really thought of that. Yeah.
Right. And the thing is, like, sure, like, Soeki doesn't necessarily engage with Nobunaga directly. He uses, I guess, a lot of cunning and political maneuvering.
And he maneuvers other samurai,
through aesthetics.
Yeah.
To potentially gain the military or the capital power he needs to potentially overthrow the government.
Yeah.
And this is not any government. This is potentially one of the greatest, like, warlords that Japan had ever seen.
Yeah.
So for, like, an old monk dude to do that, that's like, pretty ballsy.
Yeah. Interesting.
So there's power in, I guess, the aesthetics. Whereas in contrast, when you see this, like, world of, like, treasures, beautiful artworks through Furuta, it's just, like, nice artwork.
He loves it. He doesn't see any. I don't think he aspires to more. He just.
So he has a very pure.
He's a pure. Yeah, he loves that teacup. He loves that pot. He's not trying to accumulate things for anything other than I want beautiful stuff.
The pursuit of, like, the arts, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's really, I guess, noble and likable. Yeah. He even goes
an honest appreciation,
like, an honest appreciation, and he does truly heroic stuff. Just for that opportunity.
Yeah, like sacrificing his life.
His wife, even his wife at one point, right? The other thing is, what was it? There's this scene where he volunteers to negotiate the peaceful surrender of, like, a lord that they need to take, like, as a military objective. And right before he embarks, the previous messenger, like, is brought back, like, this horribly disfigured, mutilated. Furuta sees this, and I think that's important to the reader. So Furuta, the character, knows, like,
he could die,
mortal danger
on this mission. Yeah,
like, he's about to, like, potentially, like, I don't know, like, experience as a consequence. But like, one, he's motivated to succeed in the objective to get the military, I guess, like, achievement.
Yeah,
but.
To be rewarded
for the opportunity of getting. either the privilege to see the treasure,
Yeah.
just to see, right?
Yeah.
And in the pipe dream is to own the treasure as
Yeah.
well. But I don't know. I think it's interesting to compare and contrast the motivations of these three main story threads.
Yeah.
Sure, there's supporting, I think, conflicts with Hideyoshi and Akechi, but I don't know. It's just interesting to see the main show, which is Nobunaga,
Yeah.
contrasted with this guy.
Yeah, and just to
Because I think, make no mistake, this is a story about ambition
yeah
and what you want to and why you want to succeed. Perhaps, and the goals that you want to attain.
yeah okay, and just for the viewer, he fails in that mission, the one that he volunteers for after he sees the first.
He does. He does.
He gets kicked out of a castle and onto his back.
No fault of his own, though.
Yeah, he tried.
He tried.
I think that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about for this session. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Don't judge a book by its cover.
I'm really looking forward to going through it more, and yes, we're gonna do this again next month, reading volumes 3 and 4, and maybe we can improve the format or the video production. But yeah. Thanks for joining me tonight.
Yeah, all good.
Okay, bye everybody. Please join us for the next year of these videos. Let's have some tea.
It's not in frame, so just gotta pretend that, or trust there's tea below.
We'll sort it out next time. Actually, yeah, we can take a photo. We can insert it as a slide.
Oh, really bad B-roll.
Really bad B-roll.
I think some channels, they usually put a prop.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're gonna learn. Alright, so we're just starting with a pot of tea, and this is pu'er tea. And something that they did not have access to in Nobunaga's Japan.
Sengoku, warring period, 400 years ago.
Yes.